Reddit, have you ever saved someone's life? I just found out I apparently did. In 2010 there was a tornado in Brooklyn. I was at the Mets game that day. Because my mom, who is a breast cancer survivor, was invited to go out on the field before the game started. When it started to rain, we hadn't even gone into through the entrance gate to the stadium. I love hanging out in the rain. But when I saw how heavily it was starting to fall and how strong the winds were becoming, I realized that it was probably best for me to duck behind a pillar. I couldn't see my mom or dad. But my mom was born and raised in Nebraska, so I knew she'd know what to do with this kinda storm. The pillar I ducked behind also sheltered this other guy, who I never knew and never really met. After everyone else realized that it was time to take shelter, this guy in his 50s or 60s was sort of shuffling back and forth, trying to decide which pillar to hide behind. A huge gust of wind knocked the man off his feet. On instinct, I ran out towards the old guy to help him up. But the guy hiding behind my pillar grabbed my arm and told me to stay. I shook him off and ran over to the guy, grabbed him under his armpit, and started to pull him off the floor. With one arm pulling him up, another gust of wind blew at me and, I swear on everything I hold dear, lifted a nearby table and flung it right at the old guy's head. So with my other hand, I got a hand on the table. The wind was too strong for me to hold it to the ground with one hand, though. So it flipped over my hand and I managed to guide it so it just misses hitting the old man's head. The table flies into the gates of the stadium. I get up and drag the old guy over to the pillar where everyone else was and take shelter there. After the storm passed, I found my parents and we went in and watched the most boring game of baseball ever. The old guy never thanked or saw me again. Met a kid 2 steps diagonal from me in a drill set during marching rehearsal my junior year. He played trumpet. Was a freshman. Having a bit of a hard time. I effectively adopted him as my kiddo. Became his mama, and at the end of my senior year he wrote in my yearbook that I was the reason he didn't quit band. He's basically the only person from high school I still talk to. Less than a year after I graduated. I don't know if I saved his life, but I know I helped him through a lot of stuff. Just by being there for him to talk to when shit went wrong. He said I was more of a mom to him than his real mom sometimes. So I guess I did my job well. He's growing up to be a great guy and I'm really proud of him for being so awesome. I'm glad I started talking to him. Last year, 2011, I was holding an event for a collegiate sporting team. I was captain. Hence why I was holding it, when there was an accident that left one of our teammates quadriplegic. I was the only one around at the time. About to take a dive into the lake we were at, when I hear help. I can't get up coming from the bushes nearby. The perimeter of the lake is lined with cement slabs that slant toward the center of the lake. Thus he was slowly sinking into the middle. I found him with water to his chin. Pulled him to shore and called 911. 10 seconds later and he would have been at the bottom of the lake. And no one would have known. Everyone's glad that he's alive. And feels sorry about his current situation. But it serves as a reminder, never dive into lakes, especially to shore. Be glad that your story ends with both of you on such good terms. Fallout from saving my teammate's life? His parents sued me, the school, and everyone involved. Were not allowed to talk to him or his family. I was almost suspended from school. Our team is now on a 10-year suspension. You read that right. 10 fucking years. And all of our team equipment seized. I couldn't even imagine if I wasn't there. He'd be dead and our situation now would seem like a walk in the park. That's an awesome story. I hope you stay in touch with him. My own story is kinda mundane. But I did get a monkey out of it. I was 11. It was probably a 4th of July picnic at my aunt's house. Around dusk. When the adults were all eating on the porch. And the kids were scattered who knows where. I was walking across the backyard to get something to eat. As I passed the pool, I saw a small body floating in it. I remember starting to take one of my velvet Mary jeans off, my favorite shoes ever, before I realized I was being stupid and jumped in. It was my 20-month-old cousin. Somehow he had crawled up the ladder and fell in. Cousin saved. Yada yada. So, my grandma told me she would get me anything I wanted. And my stupid 11-year self said I want a monkey. Sure enough. A few weeks later, she brought me a monkey. I had forgotten all about it by that time. It was a spider monkey. I guess I was thinking more like chimp. Nastiest thing ever. My dad built huge cage for it in the garage. I tried to make friends with Kiki, but he still bit the shit out of me. We donated it, cage and all, to a local nature center when it got cold. No regrets. Maybe. I had plans with a friend and he didn't show up. We called him a bunch. And when he finally called back, he said he didn't feel too well. Wasn't going out. Whatever. No big deal. He did say I love you a bunch when we hung up. Which was also no big deal. We're all a bunch of mushpits. So fast forward to what I thought was the end of my night. I was wasting time on Facebook. And his status was really off. It was sentimental and not funny. And it just struck me as weird. So, I called his phone a couple of times. And resolved to just ride my bike to his house. To make sure he was okay. It was about 4 AM. I thought what I was doing was just kind of silly and overly neurotic. But I'm kind of obsessive and I figured it would be worth waking him up for. Well, he called me back and I told him why I wanted to make sure he was okay. It turned out he was really fucked up and was pondering sort of attempting suicide. So I went over and bought him a pizza instead. It was terrifying. He was pretty shocked that I knew something was off. But we're buddies. I just knew something was off. TL. Our friend's tone was off. Accidentally realized he was going to suicide himself. We had pizza instead. This July I was in an airport at the top of an escalator where a woman was trying to deal with her luggage. A baby in a stroller. And a toddler. Her toddler slipped right before they got on the escalator and without thinking she reached for him and, in doing so, let go of the baby stroller that was halfway onto the top stair of the escalator. The stroller started to tilt downward and when I realized it was about to completely tip over, I dropped my own luggage, grabbed it and brought it back up to the landing. No idea if I actually saved the kid's life. But the escalator was empty. So I imagine it would have fallen all the way down. I was in Hong Kong on business. So my colleague and I went to Repulse Bay. We met up with some girls we'd previously met. Drank all day on the beach. Hung out. Made new friends and we're all hitting a volleyball when a guy our age, early 20s, comes up to us, his voice in a panic saying his friend is buried and they can't get him out of the sand. I immediately thought this was some prank. So we go over to the kid and literally all you can see is an arm sticking out of the sand. So we try pulling it and all you can hear is a muffled scream. When we realized what's going on and tried to get closer, the sand caved in and the arm began frantically waving in a panic. Immediately I started digging in the sand with 4 other people to find this kid's head and then I found it and we dug a small air pocket around his mouth. After about 5 minutes of carefully digging and pulling, we pulled him out. The beach was empty aside from us and it was getting pitch black out. Kind of crazy. I saved some kid's life in Hong Kong. Waiting for the bus. Random guy wearing sunglasses also waiting for the bus leans over the curb to look to see if the bus is coming. Randomly collapses. So I run into the street where he collapsed and stop cars from running over him and ask him if he is okay. Call the cops. And turns out that he was a veteran and he got a blast from a grenade several tears ago. Has to take meds to help with his migraines. HR blacks out randomly. TL. DR saved a veteran that blacks out randomly from getting ran over on a busy intersection. Good work. It's a great feeling. I pulled a guy out of a burning trailer once. He was burned badly and I wound up covered in his blood and skin. Not fun for the hour drive home to change clothes. I also spotted a pretty large shark cruising in the waves down the beach one day and got a lady out of its path. I don't know if it would have killed or even attacked her. But better to not find out. I noticed the signs of a concussion in a friend's wife who had fallen down. And forced her to go to the hospital. DR. Said if she hadn't received treatment she might have died. My sister has. She was walking to class and she passed a kid sitting in his car looking to be asleep, but he didn't look okay. She tapped on the window, but no response. She called 911. Once the cops and an ambulance arrived she had to get to class. The cop who first reported to the scene called to tell her that the kid had OD'd and would have died if she hadn't called them when she did. She's awesome and my hero. Not just for her actions on that day, but she is a social worker and does amazing things every day. A buddy of mine and I were stationed in Hawaii. We were trying to learn how to surf. Cause we were new on the island and didn't know how much of an ass kicking it was going to be. I'm 6 feet 1 inches and about 220. So it was probably just awkward to watch. Anyway, I had just gotten my ass handed to me by another wave when I look over and see this guy and a young girl pop up out of the water about 40 feet away. He looks right at me and then just shouts help. Really monotonously. I start swimming toward them. And watch as a wave rolls in. And the water level behind them recedes, creating this big bowl of rock that the wave would slam into, settle, and recede again. It was basically a big horse show facing north that water would just spin cycle against. As soon as you came above water again and started trying to get away, another wave came in to push you back down. And I was swimming right into it. Fuck. I finally reach them. And slam my board into this guy. And tell him to get to the rocks. I grab his kid as he paddles away. I see my buddy running along the rocks to grab him. And the first wave slams me under. I just held the girl over my head and started kicking. I made a little progress toward the rocks. Before it happened again. This time, I was bounced off the rocks. And the wind just left me. I paddled again. And got her above water. But I had taken a bit longer. As soon as I broke the surface, I saw the next wave. I turned. And saw my buddy. I just remember that he looked scared. I screamed catch her. And chucked her like a shot put as the momentum of the water surged me forward. He caught her. And I fell. I had the presence of mind to turn. So that my back slammed into the rock and coral. And I was run against it like I was a piece of cheese run along a grater with a fire hose. I genuinely didn't think I was gonna make it that last time. Just before I blacked out, I felt the rocks. And I clambered up them. My buddy grabbed my shorts. And I was out. I never got their names. The father just said thanks. As was laying down, bleeding all over the sand, he grabbed his daughter by the arm. And dragged her back to their spot on the beach. My buddy bought her an ice cream. And we left. Chugging wine with some friends at a lake years ago. Watching a kid swim out too far, then not seeing him anymore. As realization set in, my friend ran out there first. Dove into the water and I was about 45 seconds behind. I hesitated. We both swam out to the center of the lake and he pulled the kid up. I swam alongside him helping him drag the kid back to shore. The kid's family watched as my friend pumped his chest, choked on water and came back. It was a Mother's Day I never forget. The family didn't even thank us. We went to pick a photo that we had developed and framed for our friends that were graduating during lunchtime. I was in the backseat passenger side. My buddy A was driving. And B was in the front seat. We had just gotten our year's books so we were exchanging them. I was like D. Put your seatbelt on, I don't want to me. Yo A. Pull over until she puts her seatbelt on. I don't care if we are late. She huffs and puffs but she complies. 30 seconds later a car drives out in front of us. We hit T-bone him going 45 miles per hour. Can't be for sure if I saved her life but I saved her from more serious injuries. When I was in college there was a guy in my dorm that was having some abdominal pain for a couple of days. My RA asked if I could drop him off at the hospital as I was leaving the dorm to go out and have dinner with some friends. I said sure and drove him there and dropped him off. I wished him luck on finding out what was causing the pain. 2 days later he randomly comes up to me and gives me some flowers as I am waiting in line to get into the cafeteria at school. He tells me thanks for saving my life. If you hadn't have driven me to the hospital when you did, I would be dead now. My parents and I are very thankful. Apparently his appendix had burst. All I did was drive him to where he needed to go. It warmed my heart when he gave me the flowers and told me thanks too, because he wasn't the kind of guy to do that at all. This will probably get buried. But in 2001 I was in grade 12. A friend of everyone at the school had died tragically a year earlier on the 26th of October. We were there in memorial for him. I was talking to my ex-GF and her sister when I heard a commotion from where my friends were standing. I looked over to see a group of about 10 people surrounding 4 of my friends. I walked over to the guy doing all the yelling, and as I got there he headbutted my friend. I grabbed him by the shoulder and spun him around. I was much bigger than him. I said, "Not today man, we are here in memorial." He proceeded to headbutt me. So I fed him a right hook. He stumbled but was so messed up on meth he got back up and came at me. I prepared and he punched me in the stomach twice and ran away. I wondered WTF. I took a breath in and realized he didn't punch me but he stabbed me. When I breathed I could feel the air coming in and said in shock, "I'm gurgling," and dropped. Everyone rushed to my side. My ex-GF told me not to go to sleep even though I wanted to. Took a month to recover. It was a 10 inches knife and it missed my heart by a 1/4 and collapsed my lung with the first and punctured my liver and pancreas and knocked my abdominal artery with the other. Turned out he was there to stab my friend and only for that. But I intervened and got it. My friend most definitely would have died as he was 150 pounds and the knife would have gone through him. I on the other hand was 210 pounds and in the gym every other day and I barely survived. I was driving down an exit ramp that ended with a right turn lane or cars could merge left to go straight. There was a black Escalade parked in the exit turn lane with its emergency flashes on. So people were merging left to get around him. Traffic was light. So people were at 45-50 mph. As I'm approaching the car, the driver steps out and is fiddling with something. A car from the left lane is careening straight toward the guy. Not the car. The guy. I laid into the horn. The careening vehicle swerves and misses the guy by about 5 inch. Misses the door by about 1 inch. I felt good for the rest of the day. I went back to college at 25 and met some new people. Among them was this engaged couple from some small town. We got along pretty well and I somehow became friends, in that deep, meaningful way, with the girl. Over time, she started sharing some really personal stuff, including that she had attempted suicide in the past. So after a couple of months of our friendship, I got a feeling she was getting a bit too close to me. So I tried to keep some distance, so as not to mess with their relationship. And one day, the 3 of us went for a pizza. Had a good time and I went back home. And after a few hours later she wrote me a message saying she broke up with her fiance. And later on, she said she was alone and she took a lot of pills. She was on some psychotropic meds, and if I wanted, I could come up to say goodbye. I was a bit skeptical at first, so I just drove to her place. I found her dozing off and her fiance just stupidly crying next to her. Not knowing what to do, he said that since it wasn't her first attempt he actually considered letting her go through with it. So I called for an ambulance. Against her will. And they took her to the hospital and saved her. At that moment she hated me. But after some time became thankful. Just so I don't come off as some hero wannabe. I should probably add that later on I made a total dick move and got together with her while she was still under observation at the psych ward. Screwing over her fiance. Which ultimately turned one of the best things I've ever done into one of the worst things I've ever done. TL. Doctor became friends with a depressed girl. Saved her when she tried to kill herself. Picked up a chick in a mental institution. Became a dick for life. This will probably get buried. But haven't had a chance to tell this story on the Reddits yet. It was my brother's bachelor party. We're all drinking and having dinner. Cracking jokes. Having a good time. His fiance's brother got a head start drinking wise. My brother is having a good old moral Christian wedding. So naturally we start making jokes about their wedding night. The fiance's brother makes some joke about my brother not knowing what to do and sucking at it. My brother replies, whatever dude. You're just mad cause in a few weeks I'm gonna be poking your sister's lungs. Double quote. We all start laughing. And realize that the fiance's brother isn't just laughing. He's straight up choking. I look around the tables. Ask, is there a doctor? No quick response. So I lift him up and Heimlich a steak medallion onto the plate in front of him. The fiance's brother catches his breath. And the first thing out of his mouth is, sorry. Dude. I was just picturing you boinking my sister. Double quote. I once saved a drowning baby. It was my first day working as a lifeguard at a large water park on the west coast. And I was guarding the kiddie pool at the time. I was making my normal rounds scanning the water and such. When all of a sudden my scan was interrupted by a motionless body of a very small child floating face down in the water. I looked around at first. Panicked out of my mind. Trying to see if anyone else had the same reaction as I did. This only lasted a second before my body just sort of took over while my mind was freaking the fuck out. I charged out to the middle of the pool. Scooped up the child and ran back to shore before making my assessments. The child was unresponsive. And I decided that the child had a closed airway from choking on water. So I began to give proper treatment. I am still the only responder at this point. All the while, people are crowding around me and shouting and the parents are screaming at me. But eventually the child started coughing and then crying. I still have trouble wrapping my head around it sometimes. I ended up writing my college application essay on this. My mother told me this story. When I was about 1.5 years, my sister was born. I was walking around, talking, etc. Normal baby developments. My sister was about 2 months old when this happened. And clearly, neither of us remember this. Just my mom. I ran into the kitchen where my mom was washing dishes. I kept tugging at her pants, saying, "Mammy, Mammy, baby, baby." She just sort of looked down and said, "Yes, baby. She's sleeping." I said, "No, Mammy, baby." And wouldn't stop until she came to my sister's crib. When my mom got there, she saw my sister on her back, choking. Apparently, she spit up and couldn't roll over to get rid of the spit and started choking. My mom called emergency, and the ambulance came and saved my sister's life. My mom said that it was me who had saved her life. But IDK. I guess I just did what any other person would do. I say it was the paramedics. But that's just me. I had just moved out of my parents' house into a 4-room apartment. Everything was shared. Except for the bathrooms. No one knew each other in the apartments. So it was kind of quiet. One night I'm having a party. And invite the guy whose room is touching mine. He comes out, has a good time and goes to bed. We begin to hang out constantly and then he tells me he was extremely depressed before we met. He said he was going to off himself about a week before I asked him to party. He said he had a note and everything. He hugged me and began to cry saying I saved his life. Eventually we both moved out and San lost touch with each other. But I see him around sometimes. My best friend at college is prone to anxiety and panic attacks. And she had a really bad one a few weeks ago. I walked right into the building she was having class in and marched her out of there. Took her to my on-campus apartment. And sat her down. Got her a glass of milk. And just sat with her for a while. Finally, she got up and left without saying anything. And pretty much shut my own door in my face. I figured something was up. So I waited a little while, maybe 20 minutes, before texting her to ask how she was feeling. Her replies were strange and she kept apologizing. And I could just feel that something was really wrong. I went to her on-campus apartment. But since it needs a keycard and I don't have one for that building, I couldn't get in. Thankfully, a pair of girls who were friends of mine were going into that building, since they lived there, just at that moment. And they let me in. I booked it up the stairs to the top floor, where my best friend lived, and pounded on the door till her roommate, who had no clue any of this was happening, let me in. I got into her room. And she downed an entire bottle of painkillers and was not in good shape. I calmed her down before taking her to our school's safety and security office. And we got her medical help from there. Later on, when I visited her in the ER, they wouldn't let me go in the ambulance with her. So I had to take a bus and walk once they told me what hospital they took her to. She just kept repeating how I'd saved her life. Even some of the hospital staff thanked me and told me that if I hadn't reached her when I did, she'd at least have some massive liver damage. She already has liver issues. Or she could have died. It's a little scary thinking about it, because I almost just packed my backpack and went to class instead of texting her to ask how she was doing. I've posted this before, but I'll do it again. My roommate and I, along with 2 other friends, were tripping on acid. All of a sudden, when my friend Carl and I were just sitting around coming down from the trip, I hear bullets drop on my bedroom floor. I instantly think of Tyler in my room, so I run upstairs to see what's going on. He is standing in front of my closet trying to load my rifle. I grab it and push him backwards. I ask him what he was doing and he replies, "I was just making sure everyone was safe." I shrug it off because he was still tripping. The next day he comes up to me and gives me the biggest bro hug I've ever received. He says thanks. I ask him what for and he replies, "I was going to kill myself last night and you stopped me." We never talked about it since. He went to rehab to get help with his pill and alcohol addiction. He is now one of the coolest and happiest motherfuckers I know. I know this will probably get buried, but hey, that's Reddit for ya. Well, I used to be the leader of the largest clan in a morp called RuneScape. It was not the normal sort of clan based around training skills events. And it had no rules. It was pretty open-ended. And everyone got along pretty well. Basically, anyone could join it. And those who liked it stayed. Everyone knew each other pretty well, even though it had a ton of members. In fact, the only reason most of the clan still played RuneScape was just for the clan, not for the game itself. The clan chat was rather full one day, and everyone just decided that RuneScape had gone to crap. And so a few hundred players logged out that day and never came back. But we still have a bit of a clan left in the form of a Facebook group. We occasionally play Minecraft. Close bracket. Anyway, there had been 3 people over the few years we were a clan who came to talk to me privately, for some reason. People always saw me as the one to talk to about pretty much anything. Probably because I was a leader of the thing. Anyway, sometimes people were suicidal, and I just let them go on for as long as they needed to. And a few times, people had come back months later and mentioned that I'd somehow convinced them to not kill themselves. In 2 of the 3 cases, I didn't even realize they were suicidal until they brought it up. Now I'm not sure if they were exaggerating or not. But who knows? Maybe I actually changed something. Maybe not. My freshman year of college, I was hanging out in the dorm with some friends when a guy I had class with came into the room and asked if I and the other guy in the room could help carry someone to their room. When I went downstairs with him, I saw a girl that was passed out in a chair, along with some of her girlfriends standing around her. I helped the dude carry her up to her room, where she kept falling out of her bed when we would put her in it. She was seriously dead weight. I pulled her friend outside and asked how much she drank, and he informed me he didn't know. Apparently she had been making her own mixed drinks all night, so no one knew how much she had drank. I told him that I thought that she should go to the hospital. I have first aid training and I'm from a family of alcoholics. I know what alcohol poisoning looks like. He passed this idea along to her girlfriends and they were not keen on it since she was underage. After watching them try help her when she couldn't sit up on her own and couldn't form sentences, I basically told them that she was going to the hospital and either they could call or I would. We ended up calling 911 and an ambulance came and got her. I went on with my night and didn't think anything of it until I had class with a guy next. I asked how his friend was and he told me that when they pumped her stomach her back was 45. The docs told her that if she hadn't come in she probably would have died from alcohol poisoning. Real glad I stuck to my guns that night even though it pissed off her friends. Went to a friend's memorial party right after her funeral. It was in high school. So we all decided the best way to celebrate would be to get completely trashed. It's what you would have done. Trust me on this one. We had run out of liquor and beer. But I needed more. I went into the garage to loot the fridge, but instead I found a kid who had taken some bunk ecstasy. Or just took something completely different. I'm not quite sure. I found him laying in a pool of his own sweat, seizing up. This kid was about 9 inches taller than me and probably 60 pounds heavier than me. But somehow in my drunk state I managed to pick him up and throw him in a cold shower and called an ambulance. When they showed up to pick him up, everyone thought it was the cops and scattered. I stayed there and explained my story. I didn't get in any trouble. And neither did anyone else. I don't know if he remembers any of it. But I think I may have saved his life. I never really spoke out about it. I didn't want to be the guy that called the cops at the party. But whatever. I helped someone. Years ago when I was in my early teens, my family owned a small gas station in rural Arkansas. My mother and father were also both first responders, immediate response medical personnel, and volunteer firefighters. One day at home a couple of friends came by and said their son had been in an ATV accident. I was a junior member of the fire department, so while I could do some aspects of being part of the department, I was not medically trained. I sent them on to the store, about a mile away, and called to give my dad and mom a heads up that they were on the way. After I called, more people were called to respond and he pulled through just fine. It was a moment when I knew I didn't know what needed to be done. But I knew who would know. Friend fell off of a cliff we were climbing. I immediately jumped, grabbed him by his belt, hung onto the ledge with my other hand and pulled him up and over the top. I've taken keys away from many overly drunk friends. That has to count for something. Was out for a walk, saw an old timer was in the ditch next to the road I live on, unconscious. He had slumped over and hit the lock. Punched out the window, called 911, tried to do CPR, he died. I guess he had had a massive heart attack. A friend of mine and I went out fishing about 5 or 6 years ago. Deep into the woods about 1 mile is this giant pond. Fishing is one of our favorite things to do. So we went out and did our thing. My buddy had a history of seizures in the past. But at the time, he hasn't had one in a few years. So he wasn't taking medicine or anything like that. So you might be able to figure this one out. He got a seizure. We don't have our cell phones or anything we can contact someone with. At this point, I'm scared as shit and have no clue what to do. He starts out winded and very dizzy, then stopped, sat down, and then started to swallow his tongue. Being very scared and being a jackass I am, I tell him to knock it off and stop joking. Nothing. I then realize, holy shit, he's having a seizure. So he's on the ground. And I get my sweater and form a pillow for him on the ground. Calm him down by massaging his shoulders. Telling him things are going to be alright. Give him some bottled water we had. Nothing. Good news. He stopped. Bad news. He's unconscious. At the time, I wasn't very strong. He's about 175 pounds and I'm about 150. I carry him to the first house I find, which is my house. Conveniently a mile away. I ran the entire time. The walk doesn't take long. But this time it felt like forever. Nobody's home. So I call an ambulance. Paramedics arrive and are able to get him revived. Absolute scariest moment of my life. But I did save my best friend's life. 2. The first time my sister was getting ready to head out into the street aboard the school bus and she was almost destroyed by this speeding truck. I grabbed and jerked her out of harm's way by yanking her backpack. She had just enough time to call me a jerk before the truck zoomed by and then she went oh. The second time I was playing on some ice on the river with a group of neighborhood kids. We were climbing off and back onto the dock when I specifically told this kid to avoid this one weak spot. He stepped on it and almost plunged to a surely icy death if I hadn't grabbed him and pulled him up onto the dock. It's hard to say if I saved the life or just ended the pain, but when I was 14, I was out delivering papers. I got to the house of an old lady on my route who needed to pay her bill. And the check wasn't sitting on the mailbox like usual. So I knocked on the door when I heard a curious muffled sound. Then a few seconds later some neighborhood kids mock-intoned the sound back. I couldn't make it out. I stood there for a few minutes and I still couldn't make out the sound. But the mocking reply came back clear enough. Help. I stopped thinking and tried the door. It was unlocked. Now I could hear her. I moved into the garage and found the little old lady on the ground. Unable to stand. She had soiled herself after falling and who knows how long ago the fall happened. I helped her up. Got her into the house and called the ambulance. She thanked me a few days later when she arrived back home. What struck me as odd about it was I was so uncomfortable talking about it. I had, in theory, done something great. But when I got home I didn't mention it to my family. Didn't tell anyone at school for a long time. It all happened so fast and all I could think about was what would have happened if I didn't stop there. Why did those kids mock her? I was in a Max and Irma's in Cleveland for work and was about 5 beers deep having dinner with a colleague. For the most part the bar was empty except a couple people in the back room. I heard some panicking and screaming and I walked into the back room to see what it was and there was a woman on the ground and she was completely blue. I mean she was on her way out. Choking. A guy was digging in her throat trying to get it out, which I know is the worst way to do it. I'm EMT basic. And I basically hemorrhaged her in an unorthodox fashion because of how she was laying and how far along she was. I got the food out of her, giant piece of steak. She barely chewed it, but I definitely cracked one of her ribs whilst doing it. The paramedics showed up and took her. They and her family thanked me and bought me a beer. Afterwards, to practice squad, Cleveland Browns came up and my buddy bought a round of cookies for the entire bar, because the athletes couldn't drink. It was pretty fucking awesome. After about a half hour though I wanted to get out quickly though just in case the rib thing became some stupid lawsuit and no one had taken my name, so I dipped off. Pretty crazy night. This happened to my uncle. My uncle worked in a dentist's office in New York City. He had an appointment scheduled on a Monday for 3:30 p.m. for the one dentist. But he screwed up the timing and double booked it. Anyways, the second guy to arrive said he had somewhere to go and if there was an opening tomorrow. We said that the first opening was at 8:30 a.m. So he said he would come the next day. He arrived on time for the appointment at 8:30 a.m. and started what was supposed to be an hour appointment, but it was cut short by yelling and screaming. They evacuated the building. That day was the 11th of September, 2001. The guy who was having the dentist appointment worked in the twin towers that were hit and was saved because of the mess up in the dentist appointment. I've donated bone marrow and blood, so I saved a few in that sense. A few years back, though, I saw a car crash happen across a street from where I was standing, gardening. The car had hit a curb, flipped on its roof, and skidded into a house. The driver, a woman over 50, perhaps older, was trapped inside with the engine running and her seatbelt on. A few other people were also there, and I joined a group of men as we lifted the car enough for someone to get inside and turn off the car, free the woman. Her seatbelt had to be sawed through using a pocket knife. So we were holding the car up for a little over a minute. When she was pulled from the car and the paramedics arrived, they thanked us for what we did. Apparently she had serious head trauma from the crash and was bleeding rather profusely, and they attributed her still being alive to those of us who pulled her out of the car. Never did find out what happened to that woman. The dude I gave bone marrow to apparently just got married though. They invited me to the wedding but I declined. Really nice dude. I suppose most people would be, though, to someone who went through that to save their life. Best friend is a combat veteran with really bad PTSD. One night he disappeared from a party we at after talking to his girlfriend for an hour outside. She was the devil. I'm not saying she was a bitch and ogre, just a mean person. She was actually the devil. Anyway, she apparently told him he wasn't a man for dying in Iraq after an IED blew up his Humvee, and only men died, which was the trigger. After he disappeared I frantically called him because he's never done that before. I finally get a hold of him half an hour later. He picked up the phone and said, "You were more than a friend. You were my brother." Then quickly hung up the phone. Didn't pick up no matter how hard I tried. Lucky I heard his dog barking during that brief call and ride my bike I was wasted as fast as I could to his apartment. I watched his dog 2 weeks before while he went to visit his girlfriend in Colorado, so I had a key to his apartment. Opened the door and found him convulsing on the floor. So I threw him over my back and carried him to his car, where I drove him to the VA hospital. After finding out he polished off every antidepressant in his medicine cabinet. The doctor informed me he was stable, so I left. Then the doctor ran after me as I was waking out of the building, looked at me straight in the eyes and said, "You saved your friend's life tonight." I got about 6 feet out of the door before I fell to my knees crying. Needless to say, I purchased a bottle of Jack and polished it off before the night's end. I was walking home from the cinema one day and I was taking my usual route. Cut over the motorway slip road, then under the bridge and down a dirt track. This time I was approaching the slip road and I saw an elderly gentleman on a mobility scooter. He was driving up the exit slip road, that's right. Driving up the slip road for cars leaving the motorway, directly into oncoming traffic. I thought to myself, what the hell is he doing? Just then I saw his scooter tip over. And he fell straight into the middle of the road. I ran as quick as I could up the slip road and stopped a car that was coming. When the car stopped, I checked the old man was okay. He was a little worse for wear, but he seemed alright. I helped him up and sat him at the side of the road. At this point traffic started to build up on the slip road and I was attracting a lot of anger and horns from motorists behind the accident. I had to get the scooter off the road, so I flipped it back onto its wheels and dragged it to the side of the road where the old man was sat. Traffic started moving again and all the angry drivers hurled abuse at me whilst driving past. I ignored it and asked the old man where he was going. He told me that he was headed towards the cinema. So I faced his scooter towards the cinema and helped him back onto it. I asked if he wanted me to walk with him to make sure he got there okay. He declined. Said thank you and drove away. I watched him drive away until I couldn't see him anymore, then put my headphones in and continued my journey home. I never really told anyone about this till today. And I know this will get buried. But this was my story.